What we're going to do is we're going to graph the function, find its inverse, and then graph the inverse. Now remember that whenever we're finding the inverse, what we're doing is we're switching our x and our y value. Since we're switching them, then that means that our axis of symmetry is always going to be y equals x, because that's the exact same point that the two lines are equal. So when we're looking at example 1, what we have is a linear equation. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to graph the linear equation. So when I'm graphing it, I'm going to start with my y-intercept and I'm going to start with my slope. So when I'm looking at this, what I notice is that I have a y-intercept of 1 and a slope of -1/3. So I go down 1 to the right 3, and then what I do is I draw my line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my inverse, and I'm going to do that by switching the x and the y. I'm going to subtract the 1. I'm going to multiply by -3. And so my formal is the inverse of f of x is equal to -3x plus 3. So I'm going to plot my y-intercept at 3. I'm going to go down 3 to the right 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my line. Now, if we're doing it correctly, what should happen is that we should have a line of symmetry. And the line of symmetry should be the equation y equals x. So let's look at the next one. What we're going to do is we're going to first graph our square root function. And so when we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come up with our table. And so our table here is going to be -3 because we want 0, 1, and 4. Then we have -2 and we have 1. -3 plus 3 is 0, minus 4 is -4. -2 plus 3 is 1, square root of 1 is 1, minus 4 is -3. 1 plus 3 is 4, square root of 4 is 2, 2 minus 4 is -2. So what we're going to do is we're going to plot that. We have -3, -4, we have -2, -3, and we have 1 and -2. So this right here is what my graph looks like. I'm going to find the inverse. So I'm going to switch the x and the y. I'm going to add the 4. And then I'm going to square it. And then I'm going to subtract the 3. So my formal, the inverse of g of x, is equal to x plus 4 squared minus 3. Now, in order to graph my inverse, all I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my x and my y values. So when I do that, my y values now become my x values, and my x values now become my y values. So I have -4 and -3. I have -3, -2, and I have -2 and 1. And this right here is what my inverse looks like. So it should look symmetric along the equation y equals x. Now let's look at the cubic. So when we're looking at the cubic, We're going to do the same thing. What we're going to do is we're going to come up with our negative 1, 0, 1. And so what gives us a negative 1 is a 3. What gives us a 0 is a 4. And what gives us a 1 is a 5. 3 minus 4 is a negative 1. Cube root of negative 1 is a negative 1 plus 1, which is 0. 4 minus 4 is 0. Cube root of 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. 5 minus 4 is 1. Cube root of 1 is 1 plus 1 is 2. So when we graph it, we have 3, 0, 4, 1, and then what we have is our 5 and 2. And so what we're going to do is we're going to draw our cubic. Then we're going to find our inverse. So we're going to switch the x and the y. I'm going to subtract the 1. I'm going to cube it. And then I'm going to add the 4. So I have the inverse of h of x is equal to x minus 1 cubed plus 4. So when I graph that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the table. So I now have my x values as my y values, 0, 1, 2. My y values as now my x values, so 3, 4, 5. So I have 0, 3, I have 1, 4, and I have 2, 5. And this is going to be a cubic, not a cube root. The axis of symmetry is y equals x, so it's symmetric along that line. So for our next one, we're going to do the same thing. What we're going to do is we have a linear equation, and we're going to graph it. And so I'm going to start off with my y-intercept, which is 3, and then my slope is negative 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at 3, and I'm going to go down 2 over 1, and I'm going to draw my line. I switch the x and the y. I subtract the 3. I divide by negative 2. So I get negative 1/2 x plus 3/2 is equal to the inverse of f of x. So my y-intercept is 1.5. That's what 3/2 is. And I go down 1 over 2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the line. And I see that it is symmetric at the line y equals x. So for letter E, I'm going to do the same thing. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to graph it. And so I'm going to start off with my table of values. What I want is the 0, 1, and 4. Those are the 3 easiest square roots. What gives me a 0 is negative 1, and that gives me a 3 when I plug it in. When I plug in what gives me 1 is 0. The square root of 1 is 1. Negative 1 plus 3 is 2. And what gives me a 4 is 3. And then when I plug it in, that gives me a 1. So when I plot it, what I have is -1, 3, 0, 2, and then I have 3 and 1. So I notice that this time it's going down. In order to find the inverse, I'm switching my x and y. So x is equal to negative square root y plus 1 plus 3. I subtract the 3. I divide by -1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to square it. So when I square a negative, it becomes a positive, and I have x minus 3 equals y plus 1. So my formal line is going to be g, the inverse of g of x, is equal to x minus 3 squared minus 1. Once again, I'm going to switch my x and y's. So my x values are now 3, 2, 1. My y values are now -1, 0, and 3. So 3, -1, 2, 0, and 1 and 3. And we can see clearly that it goes through the line y equals x. So our last one, what we're going to do is we're going to graph it. And we're going to use the points -1, 0, and 1. And so what gives us a -1 is -6. What gives us a 0 is 5. And what gives us a 1 is 4. -5 and -4. When I plug in the -6, I get -1, 0, and 1. So I'm going to put a few more tick marks on here just to make sure it fits. So I have -6, -1. I have -5, 0, and -4, I have a +1. And I'm going to make sure it looks like an S. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the x and the y's. And then after I switch them, I'm going to cube it. So I have x cubed. And then I'm going to subtract the 5. So I have the inverse of h of x is equal to x cubed minus 5. So I'm going to switch around the table. So I have -1, 0, 1 for my x's, and I have -6, -5, and -4 from the previous table. Add a few more tick marks. And what I get is -1, -6, 0, -5, and 1 and -4. Once again, I see that it's symmetric along the lines y equals x.